Hello, I'm Mary Phaeton. Welcome to Cover to Cover. This show is our opportunity to meet a West Australian author and hear all about their recently published book. It's presented by Writing WA, which is the peak body for writing and associated activities in Western Australia. My guest today is Yassmin Abdel-Magied to talk about her memoir, Yassmin's Story, Who Do You Think I Am? Thanks for being here, Yassmin.
Thanks for having me, Mary.
I want to ask you about the subtitle of the book, first of all, Who Do You Think I Am? Because we only have to get into about the second page of the prologue in the book to find an entire paragraph that you need to describe all the things that you are. Give us some ideas. You know, a practicing Muslim woman, a mechanical engineer. What else is on that list?
Well, I guess there's a couple of things, and part of the reason I sort of ask who do you think I am is because what often happens is people will look at me and will look at many other, particularly Muslim women, and will make assumptions to who they might be. But my story is a little bit more than that, and also most young Muslim women's stories are most than that. So yes, as you mentioned, I'm a mechanical engineer. I've boxed for a long time. I sail, I cycle, I enjoy doing really random things. I work on oil rigs. I have designed my own race car. I'm a really bad singer, although I really love singing.
Join the club.
And apparently now an author, which is really exciting.
Yeah, it is interesting how our unconscious bias is revealed just by appearance, and I think it was one of the things that you did brilliantly in a TED Talk. Tell us a little bit about that, because it really was a wonderful approach that you took.
So the TED Talk that I did actually came out of essentially one of my experiences. So I was approached to do a TED Talk about something that I really cared about, and I had all these sort of big ideas that I wanted to talk about. And I remember I was going to meet with the organizer of the TED Talk, and she said, but on my way there, I was wearing a particularly Muslim-looking outfit that day. And I realized, or I noticed that, you know, when I caught the bus and when I walked down the street, the way that people were looking at me was very different to how they usually would when I dressed like this. And I got to this meeting, I sat down, I was like, before I get into any of these ideas that I just really want to vent about the fact that the way that I wear my scarf and the way that I style it, it can be the very same piece of cloth, but I get treated so differently. And she stopped and she was like, Yassmin, that is so interesting. I would never have thought that. And for the first time, I realized that the experience that I have, because I very clearly have different ways that I present myself to the world through my clothing, is a unique experience and a unique test of how people sort of see the world. And so the talk became about essentially, you know, dressing in the abaya, the traditional sort of Arab Muslim outfit, and saying, hey, like, what do you think of me when you see me in this outfit? And then taking that off, physically taking it off, and revealing my work uniform underneath, which is bright orange coveralls, and being like, I'm also an engineer who works on rigs, and this is also my story, and taking that off and having a normal outfit that I would wear on the street on the weekend, and being like, the outfits that I wear are simply the way I present the world, but we should really be careful not to judge or not to assume that we know the answers to who somebody is.
Mm. So it's almost, who do you think I am?
Yes. Yeah, actually, the emphasis is more kind of on the individual I'm asking the question than on me, because I know who I am.
Yeah. One of the elements of you is, as you said, that you're a mechanical engineer, and this fascinates me because my brain just doesn't bend in that direction at all. Tell me about that job on the rig, like what's some of the kind of daily things that you do and you know, interactions and that kind of thing.
Life on the rigs is completely different to just any other life, really. I think when I started in a field engineering role. So I was in charge of essentially tools that helped us drill in different directions. So I was called an MWD, which is a measurement while drilling specialist or engineer. And when we drilled down, we sort of drilled down and horizontally or at an angle. And I was in charge of the tools that would tell us where we are in the hole and like direct us and that kind of thing. So it was a really hands-on job. I was on call, so I would get a call at 9 o'clock in the morning and be on a plane at 1 o'clock to go to a rig somewhere in Australia for an unknown amount of time. So my life for my first 2 years after university was really just bizarre, because I would never know where I could never plan. And people would be like, oh, do you want to hang out this Friday? I'd be like, maybe. You know, I'm here now, but I might not be on Friday. So, and I mean, I worked initially on land rigs, So they were kind of rigs with between 30 to 50 individuals, usually men. So I was the first female that my department hired in Australia as a field engineer, which was fun. And they weren't quite sure how to deal with it. I remember my crewmate on my first hitch asking me if he was like, are you sure you know how to lift the tools? Like, are you going to be strong enough? And I was like, mate, you're a Filipino man half my size. Like, I could lift you. Like, I don't know why you're asking me this question. And so there was this real sort of, for me, like, I took everything in my stride, but it was more of an adjustment for the guys I was working with, because they needed to figure out how I would fit into their world, right? Like, there was this kind of typical process that a new individual comes onto the rig and they kind of get jostled into the kind of pecking order. But all of a sudden, here's a different creature that doesn't quite fit into...
Can't be categorised.
Yeah, and they don't know how to deal with it. And so I thought that the fact that I was brown or the fact that I was Muslim would be a bigger deal. But actually, the fact that I was a woman and I didn't quite fit into what they expected was more of an issue. But once you, and I think this applies in so many spaces, once you connect as humans, the rest of that usually tends to fall away.
You've also talked about the isolation of being on the rig as well, and I'm interested in the rig particularly because it was the place where you wrote a lot of the book, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's funny. Being on rigs definitely gave me, strangely, the space to think about writing. So I started out on land rigs, I then moved to offshore rigs, and I mean, that's another level of isolation. At least when you're on land, you can drive away or you can go for a run. When you're offshore, you are one of 100 to 150 people, and 2 or 3 hours chopper off of any land. And so you look around and all you see is water, maybe 1 or 2 other rigs. But the isolation it's almost surprising at times, because you're surrounded by people constantly, so you almost don't have space. But then every once in a while something will happen and you'll just want someone to talk to about something, or you'll want your own space, but at the same time you want your space with things that are familiar, and the kind of almost freedom to do something that isn't within the confines of the rig of what's on offer. Exactly. It's like the food is great out there, for example, but all I want to do when I get home is get a kebab and eat on my own terms and cook my own food, because you're out there for 4 weeks in a row, and it's a weird, stifling kind of experience. But that's on one hand. On the other hand, it's an interesting anthropological experience, I think. There's just all these characters. Everyone out there is out there for a different reason.
So you recognise the privilege of being in that space in the sense that it's quite an unusual experience to have had for anybody.
I feel so lucky.
Yeah.
I guess my first real job was on the rigs, so I don't really know anything else, like work-wise. I don't know what it's like to not work in drilling. But then I'll meet people, in my day-to-day life, and I'll be like, oh yeah, I'm a driller, I'm a drilling engineer, I work on, and they're just like, oh, whoa, that's so unexpected. And it reminds me that actually, yeah, this is quite an unusual thing to be doing. And yeah, I am really lucky to have fallen into this world, and to also have had the capacity to deal with how different it was to anything I knew previously, and still enjoy it, and still look at all the challenges as opportunities for learning, and have great stories to tell out of it. But it gave me all this fodder, I guess, to chew on in order to be able to write a story.
There's plenty of fodder. That's not the only fodder. The story of how the book even came about is kind of interesting too, because it came out of an essay that you wrote for the Griffith Review.
Yeah.
And I must say that the story of the trajectory from there would make a lot of authors really jealous. Tell us that story.
Yeah, look, I was, and I guess I didn't realise how lucky I was either until I actually finished the process, and people were like, this is not a normal thing. I was like, oh, this is how everyone must get their book published. So I was I was on the council, the design council for Queensland, the Queensland Design Council, and the editor of the Griffith Review was the chair of the Queensland Design Council. And I'd come off the rig straight into a meeting one day, and I was sort of complaining about, I told the chair one of the jokes that was made. I had walked up to the rig floor, and one of the blokes was like, oh, Yassmin, do you hear that ticking noise? I was like, no, what are you talking about? He was like, that's your biological clock, darling. Better get on it. And I was like, So funny. I love it, you know? And I was telling her this story and she was like, mate, your world is so different. You should really write about this. And I was like, no, nobody would be interested. I mean, what do I have? And she encouraged me to write it. Published in the Griffith Review, and it was just a matter of timing because it was published in an edition 40 called Women in Power. So Julia Gillard's kind of rise had happened and people were talking about the role of women in power and women in politics, and in the same edition was like Anne Summers and a whole bunch of other really powerhouse sort of feminists and strong women. And for some reason, obviously because it was a compelling kind of discussion at the time, the timing was right, the edition itself went really, really well. The essay got reviewed kind of all across the country, and then I was fortunate enough to be part of a number of panels at writers' festivals. So I got to go to all these. I went to the Sydney Writers' Festival, got invited to Melbourne, I did Byron Bay, Brisbane, like almost all of them. And I was there on this panel with like Anne Summers and Julianne Schultz and others, and being like, I don't actually have a book, but I have an essay that I have an experience. And so out of that, people literally and I didn't realize how blessed I was, but publishers started coming up to me and asking if I would be interested in writing a book. And at the time I was like 2 years out of engineering. I was like, are you kidding me? I'm an engineer. I don't write. You know, I don't know what you're talking about. And eventually, it was, I think the third publisher approached me and they were like, you should really consider this. I was like, maybe I should talk to someone. So I ended up asking Julianne, got an agent. They were like, look, just get an agent, sound yourself out. Got an agent, had a chat with the agent and sort of said, and she asked me, if you would write a book, what would you write it about? And I had a chat to my mum, because I really didn't want to write a self-interested kind of monologue that wouldn't be useful to anyone. I'd recently spent about half a year in Sudan with my grandma, and we were like, wouldn't it be cool to tell the story of the women that we see as really strong in the world but don't get that voice? And so I wrote this proposal about wanting to tell a story about strong Black Muslim women and the stories that they don't get heard, and the fact that they are, despite their circumstances and despite what they've had to go through in a number of different arenas, they're still incredibly powerful and resilient in their own right. My agent sent it out to a bunch of publishers, and I spent and this was so bizarre because I had to fix it in with my rig schedule, and my boss was just like, I don't understand, you're my engineering graduate, what is this? We visited a whole bunch of publishers and they pitched me. So I would go into a house and they would be like, you should write for us because we can offer you this. And I was like, whoa, okay, this is insane. Got 6 different offers from different publishing houses, and ended up going with Random House. Yeah. And just, I mean, even the process with Random House was fantastic. I was a tardy author because I was constantly not in reception and, needed to, and I also totally didn't realize how much, how long and how arduous the editing process was. Yeah. Because I finished my first draft, I was like, that's it, I'm done.
Never want to read that thing again.
Yeah, and they were like, oh, no, it's only beginning.
Yeah. There's a couple of things that you raised in there that I think are really interesting about your misgivings about writing a book at that age, and about, firstly, what would I write about and how can I make this not seem just like I'm very self-important, and also about what would this book be about. And you've touched on both of those things, but I imagine you had to be quite reflective about how you would make the book something that you could be proud of, but also giving yourself space for the fact that where you're sharing your views on things in this book, there's a possibility for growth and change within you. Yeah. And how are you going to feel in 20, 30, 50 years time about what you wrote?
Yeah, I mean, it's not even 20, 30 years time. I mean, I started writing the book when I was 23, finished writing it when I was 24. In that time, I had a year's worth of growth. Yeah. I would go back to chapters and be like, well, actually, that's not how I feel about it anymore. Because, you in your early 20s, you're growing and you're changing and you're developing and you're constantly going through new experiences. So I was living my life as I was writing this book and writing about it as I was living it at the same time. So it was, there was definitely a lot of I wouldn't say angst, but a lot of deliberation in making sure that the book would be about something that was bigger than me, that I recognized that this was a snapshot in time. So it's a snapshot of my story at a certain point in my life, but I don't expect that I will always be that way. And I hope that people allow me the space to be like, well, this is my 24-year-old self. Don't expect, if I'm the same at 30, you got to be concerned that the last 6 years I haven't really grown much, you know, like, and what I wanted the book to be, I remember having a discussion with my mentor about this, and he made a comment that a lot of the books that he read, a lot of memoirs that he read about young people that had achieved a lot of things young, they were about just looking at what they'd done. They were like, hi, I'm this person and I've achieved all these things. Whereas this, what I wanted this book to be about was to be a book of arrival, saying, I have done all these things. And this is where I'm at now, but this is where I want to take it. This is what I'm thinking about. This is what I want you to be thinking about. These are the challenges I think we need to deal with in the future. Because I just have a lot of questions. I don't have any of the answers, but I can ask the questions, and I've been in enough forums now where I'm starting to ask better questions. And so the book is kind of about doing a few things. Number one is explaining and presenting an insight into a life that has existed alongside so many other Australians' lives and they've just got no idea about. I remember talking to a friend of mine who I work with, and she's my age. And I was talking about how, I just made an offhand comment about how everything changed after 9/11. She was like, no, it didn't. What are you talking about? Like, our lives, that was like in the United States, like nothing affected us personally. And that was a penny dropping moment for me, because I was like, oh my God, this person's life continued as per normal. It was a terrorist attack in another country that didn't affect their life. Whereas for me and for millions of Muslims around the world, that really was a turning point, and particularly Muslims living in the West, in how we were treated and how we were seen. And so to kind of take an opportunity to be like, hey, here's an existence that's right alongside you. I went to the same school, I was in the same clubs, I was, you know, whatever. But our experiences are so different, and it's because you don't hear our stories. You don't hear our voice. And so the other part of it was about allowing a different voice into the public space, and not necessarily being about my voice, but being about a different voice that will hopefully empower other young women, other young people of color, other young Muslims, or just anybody really, to be like, you know what? I relate to this. I resonate to this. I see myself in this, and I think my voice is also important.
And you know what I found really interesting was how you were able to tap into your thoughts as a very young person, and it was because you kept a diary.
Yes.
How lucky was that?
Who would have known those hundreds of pages of like dodgy diarying as a like grade 5, grade 6 year, like would have actually amounted to anything. Like I went back and weirdly so many of my diary entries were about the boys in my class, like embarrassingly. But I mean, yeah, I guess it really took me back into the mindset and the mind frame of where I was at that point in time. And even like, it's amazing how quickly we forget things, and how quickly our memories fade, and how quickly the intensity of something that we feel at a time we can no longer recollect unless you have some sort of a trigger. So although I don't keep it as often now, which I do regret, and I think maybe it's something I should pick up again, just keeping a record of what's happening in your life, even if it's just a snapshot, is incredibly powerful. So when you go back, you also see how much you grow. Yeah. You also see how much things change, and also how much something meant to you at the time. So my diary entry when 9/11 happened was, there was this weird attack, and you know, people keep blaming us, and I don't really know why, but anyway, this is happening in my class. And you know, it was just this snapshot in the mind of a 10-year-old being like, something's happening and I don't know what is going on, but it's affecting me. Yeah. Like, it's affecting me to the point that I wrote about it in my diary.
Because your parents showed you on the front cover of the newspaper, didn't they?
Yeah. So it was, I mean, we all remember where we were when we heard the news about 9/11. And my mum was like leaving the house to work, and she was like, if anyone throws rocks or does any, like if something happens at school today, let us know. And I was like, why would something happen at school? This is 8 o'clock in the morning. And she was like, oh, haven't you seen the news? And I remember the moment where the paper like unfolded in front of me and I saw the towers on the front of it must have been the Australian or the Courier Mail. And I was like, what? And
do you think your 10-year-old self had any idea of the implications of...
Oh, there's no way. I don't think any of us had any idea of what was going to unfold over the next
So
decade
looking
and a
at
half.
that, you didn't necessarily understand why your mum was suggesting someone might throw a rock at you today.
Why was it linked to me? You know, there's this terrible thing that's happened, but why was it linked to me? And I remember the moment my best friend, Hafsa, a couple of days later, she was like, they reckon Osama did it. I'm like, who's Osama? And why would a Muslim do that?
Yeah.
Like, it didn't make sense at all in my kind of framework of the world. But we were soon to be told.
Going back to the writing of the book, I'm interested in how your reflectiveness about the interface between, you know, a Sudanese Muslim woman growing up in Australia, and your reflectiveness about your interactions with the white world because you've had to make acute reflections of that, haven't you, to be able to write about it and then to be able to speak about it publicly. How does it affect your perception of the world generally?
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? It definitely, I think writing about it helped me clarify, or at least help me kind of logically process some of my feelings about the different interfaces, because a lot of the time we kind of go through the world with a lot of different stimuli and a lot of different kind of almost opinions that may, like, you know, a bit of cognitive dissonance really, because we don't really think things through. So the process of writing down what I thought about something made me have to actually think about it and made me have to read it back and think, actually, is that what I really think? Is that how I really feel? What it has also made me do is take everything way too seriously sometimes. Like, I remember a friend of mine the other day, I made a new friend and I was like, oh, your hair looks really lovely. And she was like, oh, I use keratin. I think that's what it's called, the like hair straightening product. I was like, ah. She was like, yeah, you know, my frizzy hair never gets taken seriously at work. I was like, this is internalized colonialism right here. Like, and I just went on this rant and she was like, yeah, well, like at the end of the rant, she was essentially like, well, you know, I'm still going to straighten my hair.
Yeah, right.
And this is the thing. It's like once you break the seal, as it were, you know, I look at so many experiences with a much more critical eye. And I also understand that, you know, yes, it might be internalized colonialism that somebody wants to straighten their hair so they're taken seriously at work, but the reality is she still has to go to work. She still has to be taken professionally. The world hasn't changed simply because we've recognized that this is a thing.
Yeah.
So kind of living with realizing why things are happening and even seeing it in myself and being like, oh, am I comfortable with that decision that I've made? Am I comfortable with how this is playing out?
But then there's a discomfort in having to point it out all the time too,
of course,
and to have the courage to do that, and to be the, you know, what people perceive or call that person who is constantly calling the, you know, that bias.
People out,
yeah, is that's a courageous decision to make too.
I think it's courageous maybe to, well, it's important to be aware of it. I think that courage comes from knowing when to call it out and how to call it out and when the effective ways to call it out are. Because if I go around calling every single thing out, I'm not going to be very popular or influential either. Nobody's going to listen to me. So it's about kind of working with people on their own terms and identifying where things are happening. And, you know, if there is a man on a rig with a big ego who says something and I call him out in front of all his mates, there is no way I'm ever going to be able to get that person's respect again because that dynamic has changed completely. But if I afterwards take him on the side and like, hey, have a quiet conversation, it's about kind of influence and how you work with people and maturing and kind of being like, well, okay, I have all these opinions and ways of seeing the world. Not everybody else is there yet. And really having to, and this was hard for me, having to recognize that everyone's on a bit of a different journey.
Yeah.
You know, and you got to meet people where they're at.
And my reading in the book is that a lot of your maturity and forbearance around those relationships and the development of them comes from the teaching of your parents, who both seem to me to be extraordinary people. Tell me a little bit about, well, firstly, I'll ask about your dad, because what I found really interesting about him was about how he encouraged you not to have boundaries around gender, for example, which fascinated me.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so incredibly fortunate to have the parents that I have. And I think I've only started to realize how extraordinary they are the older I've gotten, because I now start to, I think we all assume that the childhood that we have is the childhood that everybody else has. And the way we were brought up was the way everybody else was brought up. But my parents put in such effort into making sure that we were balanced and found, essentially provided us with the values, but didn't dictate what we did with them. So my father is, a Sudanese-born man. Well, he's German-born, but a Sudanese-Egyptian man who, for all intents and purposes, was relatively conservative. Quite an academic, quite intellectual, weird sense of humor, and I think he'd be the sort of person which, on face value, would assume that he would have certain expectations for what his daughter should and shouldn't be allowed to do, because many of his peers in Sudan have those sort of expectations. But when it came to me, when it came to all, even my nieces, my cousins and that kind of thing, he was always of the opinion that education should be something that people have equally. And sometimes I wonder, and I didn't actually write about this, but on reflection, I wonder if that maybe came from the fact that his mother was an incredibly intelligent woman. She learned how to speak German by herself because she was stuck in East Germany and had to talk to the neighbors. And she knows better German than than her husband, who had to work in German. And she was incredibly intelligent, but just never had the opportunity to pursue any sort of formal education. But I mean, my dad's a really fascinating character, I think, because for him, his values come from the religion, and culture is negotiable. So yes, something might be culturally appropriate or accepted or pushed for, but that if I can say to him, well, there's a better way of doing this, or that shouldn't really, that doesn't have to be that way, he's willing to negotiate on it as long as we don't compromise the values of the faith. Which kind of gave me a bit of leeway. And it meant that I could say, hey, I want to be an engineer, and he was okay with that. In fact, he encouraged it because he
had fun talking to you about it.
Yeah, exactly. And he saw it as a way for me to, progress and to do all the things that he wanted his kids to be able to do.
And from your mum, it seems to me that the activist side of you is very much
My mum is such an activist. Yeah, definitely. My mum's always been the sort of person that's like, get out there and do it. And anytime something happens, she's like, all right, this is great. You won this award. Now, what do we do with it? How do we utilize it? How do we, the very much just do it, stick it to the man kind of attitude. And she's quite fiery. But also, I think, has an element of gentleness and generosity in the way that she sort of sees the world. And that was something she always sort of impressed upon us, was to be kind and to be generous. So Youth Without Borders wouldn't have started if it hadn't been for my mum. And I think a lot of the things that I did, my mum kind of encouraged and catalyzed. And so, I say to people that you look at me, but you shouldn't be congratulating me, because I've only been out of home for a couple of years. I've only really been, the product or the human being Yassmin for a couple of years. Really, right now, I am the culmination of a couple of decades of my parents' work. And so they're the people you should be congratulating.
Yeah. And I thought about the fact that in writing this memoir, and in that sense that you kind of feel that you are still just hatched, in a way, that you're, in telling your story, you're telling the stories of people like your parents who may not want their story to be exposed in the way that you've decided you're willing to share yours. Yeah. How was that?
That was quite hard, actually. I think the hardest part, and Jane Caro put this really well. She was like, because she wrote a sort of a similar-ish type story recently. She said, other people's stories weren't mine to tell. And I don't think, to be perfectly honest, I don't think I had the maturity to understand that until towards the end of writing it, when we were going through the editing process. And then I sort of thought, oh, this is something that's going to be in the world. I'm giving this story out to the world, but it's actually not just about me. It's about my family, it's about my friends, it's about the people that I've interacted with. And I think I had some level of cognizance about that, but I hadn't quite realized it. And I didn't show my parents the book until I sent the final copy to the publisher. Partly because I was terrified of what they would say.
Were you really? Because you were very, I mean, there was nothing bad in there. You painted them brilliantly.
But they're still your parents. You know, you still, I think at some level, you still want their approval. You still want them, you're just not 100% sure, you know, like, and I remember being very kind of, oh, what if I'm representing certain things they've done in ways that they don't feel like was an accurate representation. My dad said something really kind to me though. He was like, look, the thing is, this is your interpretation of the world. We cannot argue with how you have interpreted something because it's your way of seeing the world. I may have intended something differently, but you obviously interpreted it a certain way. And so he was actually quite glad that I had kind of done it by myself, because he was like, this is then purely your own product, which I was very heartwarmed to hear.
Yeah. And I mean, speaking of it being your own product, then you must be absolutely over the moon with the reception that the book's had.
Oh, it's just so, I don't know if the word's overwhelming. I think I definitely had this, I was definitely feeling very overwhelmed when the book first kind of hit the shelves, and I was like, oh God, there are all these people out there that are going to know all these things about my life.
Yeah.
But now I guess I've taken on my mom's mentality where I'm like, all right, what's next? So now it's out there. Now the seeds of the conversation have been sowed. How is this going to change the conversation we're having? How are people going to, or what are the conversations people are having amongst themselves after they read the book? Has it opened their mind in any way to any new kind of insights? Has it changed their perspectives on anything in particular? That's what I'm interested in. So it's great that people read the book and are like, oh, this is lovely. But really, it's about the impact. I want it to have impact. I want people to walk away and think, well, I'm going to see the world a different way. I'm going to do something differently in my life. And when I start to see those sorts of things happening, those kind of conversations happening, that'll make me feel like, yes, it has had an impact in the world.
Yeah.
Right now, I'm still early days yet.
Yassmin, at the end of cover-to-cover conversations, I always ask for your recommendation of a West Australian book, and I love the one that you're going to recommend. Tell me what it is.
So it is by Loretta Hill, and it's called The Girl in the Steel-Cut Boots. And
Awesome.
I mean, classic. I remember reading this, I mean, like, oh my God, there's a story about my life. Because it's about a girl that goes out on, I think, in the mines, and like, it also plays out my romantic fantasies that would just never happen in actual life on the mines or on the rigs, and that you probably wouldn't really want to happen because there's a lot of drama anyway. But it's just a great light sort of romantic story about being a chick on a rig or on a mine site, and the dramas that come with it. And I remember reading it super quickly. And then proceeding to buy every other one of her books ever.
In the FIFO series, yeah.
It's gorgeous. I really, really enjoyed it.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I thoroughly enjoyed your book, and I must say that although I know that you had concerns about writing a book so young, it's really, I think the issues that you've brought up and the conversations that you've started are really important, and their time has definitely come. So thank you so much for being with me on Cover to Cover.
Thank you, Mary. Thanks so much for having me.
Writing WA creates book club notes for all the books we feature on the show. You can download them from the For Readers section of our website. If you'd like to receive them direct to your inbox each month, then subscribe to our book club e-newsletter. We know that many of you don't have a local bookshop where you can buy the books featured on the show, so Writing WA has made an arrangement with Crow Books in Perth. When you order our featured books from Crow by phone, mention the code Cover to Cover and you'll get the postage free. Next month on Cover to Cover, I'll meet Natasha Lester to discover her third novel, A Kiss from Mr. Fitzgerald. This historical romance is set in New York in the 1920s, a dazzling age of affluence and jazz. The main character, Evelyn, is working against the toughest odds to become one of the first female doctors of her generation. Thanks for your feedback about Cover to Cover, and to the people who've put writers in their communities in touch with us. Writing WA supports writers at all stages of their careers, and we love hearing from them. Contact us via the email address shown on the screen. Thanks for joining me again this month. We love celebrating the achievements of Western Australia's wonderful writers and sharing news of their latest books with you. Enjoy reading local, and see you next time.